Let me start by introducing myself. My name is Kalina Craig Henderson, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to address this group. I currently serve as the Deputy Assistant Director in the Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences Directorate. As someone who was trained as a social psychologist, I feel very much at home and an obvious affinity in addressing a group of distinguished sociologists and computer information and computational scientists. This idea to provide a forum for social scientists and computer scientists to engage with one another is the brainchild of Natalie Hengstebeck. Natalie is a remarkable AAAS fellow. With this pre-conference, Natalie astutely recognized the value in creating a space for the exchange of ideas that together could potentially improve the quality of life and address any number of vexing problems that we are facing today. Problems that have to do with the lack of equality in opportunity, the lack of access to healthcare, disparate policing and criminal justice, the loss of trust, and widespread use of misinformation. These are problems that involve human behaviors as individuals, as groups, and as individuals operating as institutions that are working across digital platforms and based on algorithms. To address any one of these problems requires computational sciences working hand in hand with the social, behavioral, and economic sciences. We are at a unique moment and juncture as a nation, as a society, and a global community. There are global threats to our well-being, and we walk in the shadow of both natural and man-made risks. As everyone here is aware, there are more local, national level issues which we have yet to resolve that have their roots in our collective failures to address our nation's worst moments in history. All of this while we are facing a global pandemic that has disproportionate impacts on our nation's most economically vulnerable and socially disenfranchised constituents, workers, and immigrants. We need big solutions that are far-reaching and capable of addressing all that ails us. I, like many of us here today, have faith in the ability of the social, behavioral, economic research communities, which includes its experts in sociology, cognition, anthropology, decision-making, and even geography, working together with computational and information scientists to make discoveries resulting in solutions that will help to make opportunity, healthcare, and justice more accessible to everyone so that basic needs like every child having access to toxic-free clean water, and even more complex needs like ensuring our senior citizens can comfortably navigate their place along the information highway are met. To be sure, today's meeting is not the first time that the Computer Information Science and Engineering Directorate has partnered with the Social, Behavioral, and Economic Science Directorate. There is a history to this that is evident in a number of large-scale, multi-million-dollar collaborations, as well as more small-scale joint funding of individual research awards that have advanced our understandings of, for example, evolutionary relationships among a group of organisms. Taking us beyond morphological structures, consider that computer science techniques allow for enhanced collection and interpretation of morphological data for paleontology. Joint funding has also supported computer and information scientists working together with sociologists and criminal justice scholars to develop more predictive models of crime. The Secure and Trustworthy Cyberspace Program, we call it SATSI, is a CISE-based program that includes SBE and has supported research that addresses cybersecurity and privacy and draws on expertise from computing and communication and information sciences, engineering, education, mathematics, statistics, and social, behavioral, and economic sciences. Like most partnerships between SBE and CISE, the SATSI program takes as a given the role of human behavior. Whereas previous generations focused explicitly on the technical aspects of computer and information security, since 2012, NSF has explicitly and very consciously supported research on the socio-technical elements. This perspective, the socio-technical one, is what we highlight today. It encompasses research at the intersection of computer, information, social, behavioral, and economic research. We see this as an approach to supporting use-inspired fundamental research that not only builds technologies, but also offers promising approaches to solving societal problems. The speakers and panelists who have graciously agreed to participate today have much to share about the benefits and outcomes of joining our forces for greater examination and understanding of the socio-technical aspects of behavior and systems. I hope that you will enjoy this session as much as I know that I will. I will now turn this over to my colleague and dad for CISE, Dr. Arvind Gianchandani.
Great, thanks very much, Kelly. Kelly, can you hear me okay?
Yep, just fine.
Okay, great. So good afternoon, or depending on where you are, good morning, everyone, and it's nice to be with you today. As Kelly mentioned, my name is Arvind Gianchandani, and I'm Kelly's counterpart in NSF's Computer and Information Science and Engineering, or CISE, as we call it, directorate. And it's my really, truly pleasure to be with you, to be able to take part in this pre-conference session of the American Sociological Association's annual meeting. For those of you who I don't know, which is, I think, a reasonable cross-section of this group, my background is in computational systems biology, so developing novel computational approaches to be able to integrate heterogeneous data sets, to be able to then in turn generate computational models to better understand how cells function and better understand disease mechanisms and potential therapeutic targets. If you think about that particular space, there's a bit of socio-technical research per se, but in my time at NSF, I've had the pleasure of working with Kelly and others to be involved with a number of investments, some of which Kelly described, that I think have really sought to help us think through the issues of understanding of how technology interfaces with people and how technology in turn interfaces with society. And Kelly mentioned some of the programmatic areas. Smart and connected communities is one that I'm particularly passionate about. Another are the National Artificial Intelligence Research Institutes. And you'll hear more about the programs that Kelly mentioned and that I just alluded to later in this session from some of our program officers and experts. Given the location virtually of this particular meeting, I think many of you probably know a bit less about CISE as a directorate as opposed to SPE. And so I wanted to spend just a little bit of time providing a bit of an introduction. Our directorate at NSF has an annual budget of about $1 billion, and we provide the lion's share, about 85%, of the federal government's investment in fundamental academic research in computer science and information science. CISE-funded projects, as you might expect, have contributed to a lot of the underlying technology that powers much of today's internet, our smartphones and tablets, wireless connectivity, GPS, and so forth. And in fact, while we don't talk about it as much, I think it's fair to say that our ability to have this Zoom meeting and much of the productivity that has been able to continue in the face of the pandemic is due to advances in computing, advanced graphics processing that allows us to be able to see one another's videos today, enhanced network connections and protocols that sustain all of the bandwidth needs that we need to be able to stitch us together, and so forth. Now, I say all of this just to simply underscore the degree to which we believe computing and computing research is deeply intertwined with the societal implications, and expectations more generally. And indeed, CISE's socio-technical frontier has been rich and important for many years. We've done focused efforts at the intersection of computing and the economic sciences, in cybersecurity, as you heard from Kelly, and most recently in smart and connected communities, where enhancing the services that local communities provide to residents, be it about transportation or healthcare or homelessness, many of those services really require an understanding of how technology and people intersect. And I think it's profoundly visible, as Kelly alluded to right now as well. The past few months of the pandemic and civil unrest, I think, have only illustrated just how much better we can and we should be doing when it comes to the intersection of technology and society. Just as one concrete example, I think we've all seen how the lack of access to broadband connectivity in certain parts of our country has created a lack of data and information about the pandemic, and it's impacted people's ability to access testing and healthcare. It's contributed to a lack of economic productivity in places, and it's contributing to, or will soon be contributing to, a lack of access to online education in school districts near and far throughout the US, as many districts move to online education this fall, or a hybrid of in-person and online. So as a research community, I think we have a responsibility to work together, building bridges between CISE and SPE to really understand and overcome these technology-driven disparities. And to also use technology, we think, in a way that allows us to overcome disparities long seen in society around health and education and mobility and so on. And we've also, I think, witnessed how technology can be used to spread information as well as disinformation in ways that may not have been intended when the technology was first researched, first developed. And so understanding the ethics and governance of new and emerging information technologies as we research and as we innovate, I think, is also increasingly critical. So I'm really excited about today's pre-conference, in that I hope it will illuminate ways in which we can bring CISE and SPE researchers closer together. What are some of our existing programmatics at NSF, but what are also new ways in which we might be able to bring folks together, folks such as yourselves, who I think are deeply committed to helping us better understand research topics like information disinformation or disparities, or empowering and diversifying the technical workforce. And I really truly hope that it will provide a means for better understanding not just our programs, but how you can interact and intersect with our programs going forward. So, at the end of the day, it becomes ever more important to build research communities where these sorts of issues can be studied in concert by experts from the SPE sciences and the CISE sciences. And by creating the common scholarly vocabularies, techniques, and communities, we feel we can really begin to address the pressing issues that we've tried to motivate over the course of the last few minutes. Before I conclude, I'm going to end where Kelly began, in some sense, extending a huge thanks to Natalie for all of her work. She's a PhD in human development and family studies and research methodology, but she also has a background in sociology and psychology broadly writ. And she has just done an amazing job working with us over the course of the last year to help us find ways in which we can bridge collaborations between CISE and SPE as well. And as this pre-conference is her brainchild, we certainly all appreciate her leadership and efforts in pulling all of us together. I'd also like to thank the NSFers who are making time for this session today. We really appreciate you for being here and for your active engagement in describing some of our key activities. And I want to thank every single one of you who's taking time to join us during this pre-conference. You could have chosen other pre-conferences, or you could have done something else with your Friday afternoon, but we really appreciate, or Friday morning, depending on where you are in this virtual world, but we really appreciate you being here. And as Kelly said, we hope that you're as excited about the opportunity space here as we certainly are. So with that, I will pause and turn things over to Natalie for some pre-conference logistics, and then we can get on our way.
Thank you so much, Erwin and Kelly. That is a wonderful introduction. I'm now going to cover the agenda. We've kicked the day off with a warm welcome and agenda setting. I'm going to take a few minutes just to cover some Zoom logistics. The timing will be a little bit off, but we'll make up time. We're going to talk about some different NSF programs that already exist, and that'll be led by different program directors. Then we're going to transition to a conversation about some of the conversations among the advisory committees that have been happening between NSF and, between the CISE Advisory Committee and the SPE Advisory Committee. Then we're going to do breakout sessions around specific topics. They will be, the first one is identifying mutually beneficial research topics. The next one is exploring new ways to collect, store, and share data. then training scientists to work across disciplines, partnerships to support CISE SBE research, infrastructure, and workforce development. And you all in the registration will have seen these, but what we're going to ask you to do in a minute is to change your name, and I'll show you how to do that, to reflect which session you want to take part in. At the end, after we've done all of the sessions, there's going to be some networking. Again, one real perk of doing this online is it made it possible to invite a whole bunch of people from across NSF, including the Graduate Research Fellowship Program for those of you who are in grad school or are thinking about grad school. It also presents possibilities to bring in folks from the HBCU, Historically Black College and Universities undergraduate program, and the Tribal Colleges and Universities program. So super delighted to have a strong showing from across NSF. In those sessions, there will be general things about getting to know NSF and just questions you may have about any of those programs. There will be a session on how to become a program officer with various program officers so you can talk to you about their experiences. Finding collaborators on socio-technical projects, developing graduate programs, and identifying gaps and opportunities. So that's pretty much the agenda we're looking at. If you'd like a full written one, there's a link here. In terms of Zoom, general housekeeping, these sessions are going to be recorded. I plan to upload it back into the ASA system so that if you think anybody else would be interested, you're more than welcome to redirect them to watch the recording. We ask that when you're not speaking, you keep yourself muted. Your call on whether or not you want to leave your video on. As many of you have discovered, you can use the chat to ask questions, and we encourage you to use the interactive features. You'll be invited to join breakout rooms for the networking sessions and the breakout sessions. So you'll be redirected to that. Again, tell you how to do that. At the discretion of the lead of your breakout room, you may use these whiteboard features. Basically just, you can annotate together and take notes before the report out. I'm gonna skip through these since we're over on time, but there's a help button inside the breakout room that you are welcome to use to reach out should you need it. So in order to choose a breakout session, what I'm gonna ask you to do is if you click on participants and you find your name in the list, you can rename yourself, and I'm asking that you put in which group you would like to participate, A, B, C, or D, before your name, and that'll make it really easy to put you in the right rooms. Okay. Well, with that, I'm going to hand it off via video. We've recorded these sessions about the programs, and then we are going to we have all of the program officers here who spoke, and you'll be able to see and ask questions at the end.
I'm Darlene Fisher, Program Director in the Directorate for Computer and Information Science and Engineering, also known as CISE. For the last 6 months, I've also been on detail to the Social and Economic Sciences Division in the Directorate for Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences, often referred to as SBE. I, along with other CISE speakers, will talk about research and funding opportunities led by the CISE Directorate. Next. We expect that you will, of course, continue to explore the sociology program as well as existing and emerging programs in SBE. But we also want you to set up your sights on less mined opportunities in CISE. We want you to explore these existing and soon to be released solicitations led by CISE with exciting research that needs your expertise. Reach out to computer and information scientists in your university to form collaborations and consider leading such a research team, and then submit to one or more of these solicitations. Next. Last Friday, CISE released its course solicitation, NSF 20-591, which covers research topics in computer and information science and engineering. I call particular attention to CNS and IIS, and note that Joe Whitmire will talk about funding opportunities in OAC. Computer and network system projects often include applications as test cases for the functioning and performance of systems projects where the applications involve human users and have potential for social impact. Researchers also consider social networks. These projects would benefit from including social scientists from their inception. IIS has its human-centered computing program, formerly called Cyber Human Systems, which obviously from its name invites social science partnerships. Medium projects for the core programs are funded up to $1.2 million up to 4 years. Next. From time to time, CISE joins resources with industry partners for typically 3-year projects up to $3 million total. The largest internal to CISE program is currently the Expeditions in Computing, with most projects requesting $15 million over 7 years. We have received pre-proposals for this year's competition. About a third have social science components, and many major universities have submitted collaborative pre-proposals. The team memberships is fluid, potentially up until the teams who are invited to submit full proposals make their final submissions by the February 16th, 2021 deadline. Next. This slide lists cross-NSF, cross-agency programs that fund up to $7 million per project. SBE is a partner in the first 2, but just because the SBE is not currently a participant does not preclude the inclusion of social scientists where their expertise would enhance the project. Next. As you can see, there are many collaborations and funding opportunities outside of the sociology and other social science programs in which you can stake a claim. Here are more which will be discussed by other speakers in this session. Next. We invite you to Google or web search for any of these programs or solicitations noted in this presentation. Or better yet, sign up for CISE email to automatically receive notices of funding opportunities by clicking on the Get CISE email updates that you see at the bottom of the blue ribbon on the left, and which runs down the left-hand side of the CISE homepage. This action is particularly important as several of the programs covered in this talk will have new solicitations that will be posted soon. Next. No one is claiming cross-disciplinary teaming is easy, and here are just some of the challenges we know you will face. The key takeaways are: prospect for exciting new research opportunities, join or create teams of alloy computer and information sciences and social sciences into a single entity. Note, ones that want to bring in the gold but operate as if they are separate grants do not fare well in the competitions. Just as with social scientists, computer scientists do not have all the same expertise. So it is important to make sure that each team member has the right expertise for the project. Be full partners from the beginning to shape the proposal, drive the ongoing research, advance your own research innovations, as well as assess and lead research to have social impacts. We look forward to discussing these topics in the breakout sessions. Contact us directly anytime after this meeting to continue a dialogue about how the research community and NSF can foster multidisciplinary research. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation to speak about 2 of our important research programs, Smart and Connected Communities and the Civic Innovation Challenge. Smart and Connected Community program began in 2015 with a set of visioning workshops which brought together researchers and community representatives and eager grants for exploratory research. These help to identify a short and longer term agenda for smart connected communities research. One of the key takeaways was that innovative research, which tightly integrate technical and social and behavioral science dimensions, is essential to significantly impact society, whether in quality of life community and environmental health and well-being, education, or overall economic growth and stability. We chose the name of our program deliberately. While the term smart cities has been used and discussed for many years, our vision is broader. We see the challenges as being not just in our large urban areas, but also in suburban and rural communities, regardless of size. The SNCC program spans multiple NSF directorates, including Computer Information Science and Engineering, Education and Human Resources, and Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences. The program has nearly completed a third year of awards, with a total since 2016 in excess of $90 million. One observation from our first years of SNCC was that while community engagement may be deep, research concepts have mostly been pushed from academia to the community. We created the Civic Innovation Challenge to emphasize community co-creation with academic researchers and to accelerate the innovation process through this co-creation with the end customer. Civic 2020 included 2 tracks, mobility and resilience, and is a joint collaboration between NSF, Department of Energy, Vehicle Technology Office, and the Department of Homeland Security, Science and Technology Directorate. Our last chart shows key elements of smart and connected community research. These include the integrative research that spans technology and social and behavioral science dimensions. Key to these are research questions. Second is community engagement, which must be deep and result in piloting of research concepts, enabling the community to evaluate the research in the real world. Our program looks for societal impact over near and midterm horizons. SNCC program is updating its solicitation for FY 2021. Finally, I'd like to offer thanks, and let's roll the video, which gives a hint at our Smart and Connected Communities research.
It's no secret America's communities face an almost unending array of challenges. But dozens of science and engineering research projects with federal funding are now helping to meet those challenges head-on. Research projects with support from the National Science Foundation through its Smart and Connected Communities program. Some examples. In New York, researchers are working with the city's Department of Environmental Protection, the Business Improvement District of Lower Manhattan, and others to create a comprehensive noise pollution model of the city. Real-time results from machine learning enable rapid pinpointing of what's making noise and where it's located, and will help mitigate what can be serious health effects.
Using sonic algorithms and sensors, we could now be more predictive and prescriptive in how we respond to these complaints in the city.
In Indiana, researchers are collaborating with a local development firm and the Indiana Housing Community Development Authority to create a tool that lets people compare their energy usage to others in their community and incentivizes residents to make energy conservation a community effort. In Michigan, researchers are working with partners in Washtenaw County and Ann Arbor to develop a smart, sensor-based system to control a network of valves and improve stormwater management and the overall water quality of watersheds, and add economic value.
For me to replace this infrastructure would cost millions of dollars, but for just $25,000, we found a way to not just manage the flows, but our water quality performance improved by 33%.
Less construction, more performance out of the same old thing.
Other Smart and Connected Communities projects involve improving communication technologies for emergency responders in rural areas, landslide prediction and effective warning systems for small or remote towns, tools to visually explore mobility solutions that provide greater access to employment, education, and healthcare, safer, more economical, more equitable internet access in under-resourced urban communities. And all that's just a sample of the broad range of NSF-supported Smart and Connected Communities projects.
So, if you're a city or community official or leader, we encourage you to engage with local researchers or directly with us at NSF to catalyze and nurture future collaborations.
to help you take on tough challenges.
Find innovative, people-friendly solutions that fit your city or town.
To help make it run better.
And make life better.
For everyone in your community.
Hello, my name is Rebecca Hua. I am a program director in the Division of Information and Intelligence Systems within CISE. Together with Jim Donlin, I am a co-lead for the National Artificial Intelligence Research Institute's program. This is the first year of an effort to establish institutes in AI around areas of critical national importance. The rationale for this program stems from a National AI Research and Development Strategic Plan developed in 2016 and updated in 2019. The plan had as its first strategic objective the goal to make longer-term investments in AI. This program is a multi-agency effort to do just that. Here, NSF is joined by the USDA NIFA, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Department of Transportation's Federal Highway Administration. The program had as its goals to significantly advance AI, to accelerate AI-powered innovation, to grow an AI-ready workforce of researchers and practitioners, and to create national nexus points for diverse organizations to work together, including universities, federal agencies, industries, and nonprofits. To address the breadth and scale of AI research, the program emphasizes the complementary roles of both foundational AI research challenges and use-inspired opportunities to drive forward both the research and the societal benefit. Research in foundational AI seeks to develop theory and methods that are independent of any particular domain of application. As examples, among the foundational issues identified in these discussions were the research needs in trustworthiness of AI and foundations of machine learning. Next, the term use-inspired research refers to basic research that has use for society in mind. Use-inspired research seeks new methods and understanding in AI by situating the research in a domain of application to simultaneously inform progress in AI and solve particular use cases. The sectors for such use-inspired research are many and may be aligned with any area of science and engineering, such as those shown here in the vertical stripes. The goal in this program is that each institute incorporate substantial efforts in both foundational AI research and use-inspired research such that they form a virtuous cycle in which the foundational results provide a starting point for use-inspired research, and results from use-inspired research are generalized and made foundational. We use the term use-inspired rather than applied to emphasize that this solicitation seeks to support work that goes beyond applying known techniques and adds new knowledge and understanding in both foundational AI and use-inspired domains. This year's solicitation invites submissions in 2 tracks. The Institute track is a cooperative agreement for 4 to 5 years for $16 to $20 million. They're institutes corresponding to one of the 6 identified themes, and they are trustworthy AI, foundations of machine learning, AI-driven innovations in agriculture and the food systems, AI augmented learning, AI for accelerating molecular synthesis and manufacturing, and AI for discovery in physics. Altogether, we have received about 90 proposals. And then the second track is the planning track, and this is a grant award for 2 years at $500,000. There are efforts to develop communities and capacities for future institutes. and we have received 166 proposals in the planning track. All proposals have been reviewed and decisions have been made, and soon they will be announced to the public. And I'd be happy to answer more questions about this program in a bit. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Joe Whitmire, along with Toby Parcell, one of the two sociology program directors in the Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences Directorate. So I'm going to talk about a few of the competitions that support innovative research at the intersection of the social and computer sciences. So you see 4 of them here. The first 2, Growing Convergent Research and NSF Convergence Accelerator, are NSF-wide programs. They both involve multiple disciplines, including collaborations between social and computer sciences. The third one, Secure and Trustworthy Cyberspace, comes out of CISE, but there's a cognizant program officer in the SBE Directorate who looks after the SBE proposals. And then the fourth one here, Human Networks and Data Science, is actually a new program in the SBE Directorate. It's evolved out of the resource implementation for data-intensive resources in the social sciences, or RIDER program. And again, involves typically collaboration between social scientists, including sociologists, and information scientists. I'm not going to discuss any of these in further detail because they are discussed in detail in the presentation that Toby and I recorded on Zoom for the ASA meetings, and this is available through the ASA's online program if you're registered for the meetings. What I would like to talk about today are 2 programs that are out of CISE Directorate, specifically out of the Office of Advanced Cyber Infrastructure. Both of these are for collaborative efforts between cyber infrastructure researchers and domain scientists. And both of these programs are really underutilized by social scientists and by sociologists. The first of these is the CSSI program, Cyber Infrastructure for Sustained Scientific Innovation. So this is for the development of cyber infrastructure in a domain science, so in a social science, that is community supported. So this should be the kind of project that is not just to support the scientist's own research, but would be of use to a wider community, and this should be demonstrable. It should be science-driven, and it's going to be innovative for both the domain scientists, but also innovative on the cyber infrastructure side. It's going to be collaborative between cyber infrastructure scientists and domain scientists, and it's collaborative in a sense from our end. There's funding contributions from both the Office of Advanced Cyber Infrastructure and from the domain science. The past year had 2 different levels of these grants. The elements, which were awards up to $600K up to 3 years, and the frameworks, which were up to $5 million for 5 years. The other program that I wanted to talk about was CISE program, Cyber Infrastructure for Emerging Science and Engineering Research. This is for projects that are perhaps at an earlier stage than the CSSI ones. This is for early stage collaborative activities between domain scientists and cyber infrastructure scientists. The CSSI program might be more for cyber infrastructure projects where perhaps there's already some work done on this, maybe in a sense of pilot or work that's been done for your own research, and now you want to make it more widely available for the broader community, which could use it. This is for more early stage collaborative activities. And the research should be potentially transformative It should be collaborative and innovative on both sides, the cyber infrastructure side and the domain science side. And again, there's funding contributions also from both sides on our end, from the advanced cyber infrastructure and from the domain science. Awards here have ranged up to $1.5 million. So if you have any questions on these or other programs, I'm happy to answer them. Thank you for your time.
Okay, and with that, I invite the program officers who spoke up to show your faces and unmute yourselves. And now we'll take questions in the from the chat, please. It looks like the first question is, could you please provide parameters for community support?
I am wanting to have more clarification on what you define as community, because that's a pretty broad statement as a sociologist. So could you give us some parameters on that? Thank you.
Well, I'll speak. This is Joe. So for example, for the CSSI program, for community support, the idea would be that you simply need to show that there is a broader community. It's beyond your own research. There is a community of other social scientists who would be interested in the product that you're creating and would be able to use it and produce innovative research themselves with this. So whether it's some kind of software tools or making a database available or whatever, but it has to be useful for a wider set of people in one particular discipline or across disciplines. So it's not a precise definition.
It have to stay within academia. Can it be like in diverse communities?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. It does not have to be within academia. No.
Thank you.
In a broader sense, if we talk about smart and connected community programs for our civic innovation challenge, community is a geographic sense, but it could be from that community a group of people within kind of a neighborhood, could be a business innovation district. It could be people from a water improvement district, could be Department of Transportation. It could be just a collection of people that have the ability to host or demonstrate technology or shape technology within the context of that community. So enable to pilot something within the group.
So I just want to clarify that it does not have to be a place-based community when you talk about, smart and connected community. Because when I was looking at NSF, there's this the science of broadening participation, place-based community. So I was actually thinking that you actually require that. But Joseph, you're saying basically we don't need it, right?
That depends on the situation.
Yeah.
You should always look at each solicitation, because each solicitation has requirements that you have to meet, and you don't want to go to a lot of work and then have your proposal returned without review because you missed some requirement.
All right, the next question, one panelist mentioned hoping to increase collaboration between computer and SBE scientists. Since when something isn't happening, one must ask, what do you view as being the main constraints preventing such a collaboration now?
Partly it's finding the right person in the other fields or any other fields. We had eagers for, rapids for the COVID, and we had computer scientists who desperately wanted to make contributions on the digital divide with students being at home, and they were not able to do what we saw is appropriate research that social scientists, the right social scientists would really understand, but you have to get somebody who's in the right field. And so doing that match, I think, is one of the biggest challenges.
If I may jump in. So I'm a rotating program officer, and so prior to joining NSF, I am a professor in computer science at University of Pittsburgh, and I have tried to collaborate with some of the social scientists at Pitt, and some of the challenges that we seem to have faced is just simply a lack of common vocabulary, a lack of similar shared perspectives. So sometimes we even have the same words, but we mean totally different things. Or something that seems obvious to one group, but it turned out to be quite complex. I mean, even just earlier, just now, I mean, like there's this question, what does community mean? Because, you know, I think as a social scientist, you take it more seriously and you say, well, we need to understand what community means. And maybe a computer scientist might kind of say, oh, well, community, you know, just community. I mean, what else is there to say about it? So some of the challenges I think is really important to get across is simply sharing the right outlook, and that just maybe takes time.
Interesting, really interesting.
And Jacob has his hand raised, so let's do that, and then we will move on to the next section.
So I have a question for Dr. Hua. So do you have any indication of some of the possible themes for the next AI Institute call? And is there any chance that there might be a explicitly kind of SBE-oriented theme?
So I believe we have to wait for the solicitation to come out. So I recommend watching closely for the space, and hopefully soon we will see something. In general, I should mention that just talking about this past round, I mean, if you read the 6 themes that we had, maybe it didn't sound initially very SBE oriented, but in fact, almost any of the themes you can emphasize kind of the SBE perspective. Almost every one of them. I recognize it's harder for like the chemistry one or the physics one, but for any of the other 4, I think, you know, you can make a strong case for an SBE perspective or researchers who typically apply to SBE. Yeah.
We will move on to perspectives on building bridges between CISE and SBE with 2 members, one from the CISE Advisory Committee and one from the SBE Advisory Committee. And I will hand it off to you, Beth and Willie.
Okay, we're going to try to make up a little time here if we can. Just a general background that we had a committee that was a subcommittee, and it had representatives from both CISE and SBE. We had 2 people from each advisory committee, and I want to make sure I give some credit to Beth, who is my colleague at Georgia Tech. She serves as one of the co-chairs for this committee, and along with Duncan Watts at the University of Pennsylvania, and unfortunately he can't be with us today. So what we're going to try to do is really briefly summarize a much longer report. And if we go to the next slide, we'll see the goals of the committee. We had 3 basic goals, and I think some of this has been covered by previous speakers when Kelly and Irvin spoke. But one of the main things was we want to foster this kind of a collaboration between the scientific research and the computational and SBE kind of spheres. But the second one was to not only emphasize and underscore the interdependence between technological and social systems. And the third one, and this was something that we paid a lot of attention to, and that's trying to explore ideals how we can better collaborate between the academic community, industry, and I would include in here government, and particularly around data, science, and society. What we did with these 3 goals, we came up with kind of 4 cross-cutting challenges. Some of this was spoken to by some of the questions that you raised. So we had 3 basic panels. One dealt with improving trust in the information ecosystem. Kelly mentioned this a little bit. The second panel dealt with rendering visible and understanding of reducing historical disparities. And the third one dealt with empowering and diversifying the technical workforce. In each of these panels, there's 2 persons from the SBE community and 2 from the CISE community. It ended up, we had a fairly diverse group of people who signed in for this virtual meeting. It took place in May. We had about 71 people who signed up. We had a smaller group from industry and a larger group from academia. The problem was that there were a lot of things happening with COVID-19, so industrial people could not participate. We also had the fortune of trying to get people from different kind of institutions. We specifically tried to have a good representation from minority serving institutions, and we did. We could have had a bit more, but that was the best we could do under the circumstances. Next slide, please. We had a number of themes that we identified. And again, you have spoken to some of these already. Let's go with theme 1. So almost everyone had the notion that we need more and better data. I'm just going to highlight a couple subpoints because so much of the focus tends to be on quantitative data, quantitative analysis. So one thing that came out of these discussions was to make certain that persons who did qualitative research, that there's a place for them in terms of these initiatives with SBE and CISE. Another one I would like to highlight is this notion about shared repositories. This is something that resonated with both SBE and CISE individuals, and especially trying to do longitudinal surveys rather than just cross-sectional data. Another factor under this was the ethics. It became very clear in our deliberations that the present IRB policies at universities need to be rethought or to be re-examined to be a bit more in line with the reality of doing research, especially the kind of SBE size type of research. Next slide, please. Here's one that comes up quite a bit, and again, it came up earlier about the need to create and sustain multidisciplinarity and even the definition of what's multidisciplinarity. So one thing we wanted to emphasize is this methodological diversity, and especially for people who are doing mixed methods or qualitative methods, but also, as was mentioned earlier, some common definitions across the particular fields. So one of the other issues, and Beth will address some of these issues later on. One about the scalability of research possibilities. And I think another one that was consistent across the people who attended the meeting was this issue about having these teams or partnerships across disciplines. That was addressed kind of earlier too, but this becomes very important because trying to engage members from different groups, and we recognize, particularly in academia, we have this thing called tenure. And so sometimes trying to do these collaborations result in some barriers that need to be removed. The second thing, next thing, please. I think, Beth, do you take over from here?
Yeah, and actually we can just back up that slide for a second and I'll pick up with theme 2 and go from there. So again, my name is Beth Munnan. I'm a professor of interactive computing from Georgia Tech, and it's just a real honor to be able to speak with you today. I wanted to spend a second here because of the conversation that we had previously in the session. You know, part of Sarah and others' question was, you know, there have been incentives in terms of funding for these kinds of collaborations, but what are the barriers and what are the constraints that we feel that are keeping these from happening more often? And so we know that methodological diversity is important, and the calls for research are asking for that. But what we heard from our participants in our workshop was the work that is needed to actually build functioning multidisciplinary teams that often involve questioning the initial assumptions or presumptions and framings for research. And I was laughing because my very first really difficult multidisciplinary collaboration when I started at Xerox PARC back in the 90s was how to support communities online. And we spent probably almost a year understanding how we defined community and what that meant, what we would look for, how we would measure it. And I had just come from a computer science psychology background, and I never realized the depth to which one could engage on the question of what is community. And I learned so much in those early days, and it meant so much to the research. But the questions that as a computer scientist I wanted to ask in that initial collaboration were all wrong, and we needed the time working together to actually ask the right questions and build that foundation. And so that's what we heard over and over again in the notions of the workshop, is that we have to create the time and space to get the assumptions and to get to the framings to work well together. We wanted to point out, many people did within the NSF, and part of the relevance to industry is that the training of students participating in these research programs is also an important impact. It's not just the research finding themselves, but we're creating the kinds of workforce that we want to see, so that when we're trying to understand issues of equity and fairness and the role of AI, you know, the folks have been trained in our programs, in our institutions, and they're ready to deal with these kinds of difficult socio-technical challenges. And then we looked a little bit more in depth about what kind of characteristics did you need, you know, what was really there if we found successful academic programs. And in fact, at some point we felt like some of these programs felt as so rare, we actually nicknamed them unicorns during part of our discussions. But you know, what was necessary that we could create that scalability, that longevity, and that we could work through the difficult research incentives. Computer scientists like to, you know, we publish conference articles on crazy timelines, which is really in some sense quite the contrast to the deep long-term work that's done to publish a volume, to publish a book. You know, how do you match up all of these types of near-term incentives and structures to facilitate these kinds of collaborations? So going forward to the next slide, when we were looking at the questions of, you know, what does it mean for us to, you know, how do you frame these types of socio-technical research programs? So there were lots of great questions that came up, and it again pointed to this discussion of you need sustained discussion to get to this. What does it mean for an AI machine learning person to understand how to reveal hidden work and to understand that within communities that are vulnerable and harmed? If you look at like Mechanical Turk as an example of that, what does it mean to have an ethics as a research program within the computational sciences? What does it mean to design interactive online systems that maximize public good and understanding the relationships to private rights? When we looked at that, we also understood that one of the key themes we looked at was the role of diversity, and that like community, this needed to encompass many dimensions: racial, disabilities, generational, individual, societal, and that we needed comprehensive definitions as a shared resource for these types of socio-technical collaborations. And one of the things that was pushed really on the CISE community was that we need to build in critical and reflective processes into computing research. Very often we're iterating on the solutions, but not necessarily iterating on the questions. And how do we prioritize evaluation research within our community such that part of a research proposal will be to pick up the research results from another team and then put it into more longitudinal evaluation? How do we build that into our cycles? So as we go forward with the next slide, we also reflected on the needs for the kinds of partnerships, and you'll see communities there again. As Willie mentioned, because of where we were in COVID in the April-May timeframe, it was really difficult for us to have a huge amount of industry engagement in our workshop, although we did have some key folks there for New York Times as one example. But the partnerships with industry need to be more about what our community typically thinks about, which is just access to the data, that it needs to be a multi-level, multi-pronged relationship that also is about the design and evaluation of the technology itself. And then one of the things that we wanted to flag is it wasn't just about partnering with industry, even nonprofit industry, but partnering with communities themselves. And then when we've looked at past smart and connected communities work, many of the PIs will reflect that 50% of the effort goes into nurturing those relationships, whether it's an action research or other types of research framings where you're having to do the needed work to build trust, to build accountability, to perform the pro bono work that's part and parcel of that engagement, and that needs to be resourced by the applications themselves. So on to the next slide, and I think turning it back to Willie.
Yes. The other thing we talked about, and we'll see it in the next slide as well, and thanks, Beth, for covering some of the detail of that particular section. One of the things we talked about quite a bit in that workshop was about proposed solution. The thing that came up more than anything else was modifying the NSF review process and the kind of reviewers that are selected to evaluate interdisciplinary research. The other thing that came up was a need to have some kind of incentive structures. And these were basically looking at, if we're going to try to do this collaboration between SBE communities and CISE, we need to begin to think of the process of structures, but also incentive structures that facilitate closer collaborations across these areas. And I would add that in one of the conversations, it was not just what NSF can do to improve the process, but academic institutions could do a little bit better job in terms of facilitating interdisciplinary research and recognizing that the publication streams might be different, but also the when it comes up to tenure, promotion, things like that may be somewhat different. Next slide, please. And we had this point that I think Beth and Duncan went into a little bit more detail. They had more time, and that this isn't new. Kelly and Irvin spoke to this a little bit about more recent history, but more ancient history. I was involved in one of the earlier issues of SBE, well, actually it was CISE, reaching out to a few social sciences to deal with broadened participation. And that didn't actually go so well. It was kind of imbalanced. But what is new is that NSF, and particularly under the leadership of the current SBE and CISE people, there has been this considerable outreach, and especially to address issues about diversity and disparate impacts. And so these folks I found are fairly modest, but I was a member of SBE over 10 years ago. And I can say that when it comes down to moving the needle, this is my first experience for that there's been an equal outreach to SBE community and CISE community to actually do something that's in the benefit of the public. And part of this is being able to do work that cuts across industry, academia, and I would add government. Next slide, please. We had, as you can imagine, with a large, diverse group of people in the workshop, a very robust discussion, and I hope that this is taking place in the breakouts and the informal networks. So here are some of the major recommendations that came out, and I'll just kind of run through. One was sustainable research infrastructure. And that was pretty straightforward, that everybody was saying they want to be able to start on a project and then kind of see it through. So it's not something that's funded for now and disappears. The other one was education and training initiatives. And we'll see this addressed in the breakout section that's kind of centered around preparing individuals, as Beth pointed out, who have the skill sets to do these collaborations, but they have to have some development, and graduate schools and other components of higher education have to make some serious adjustments when you're cross-training people like this. The other thing was about the budget, and we had a fairly long discussion about this, and to make sure that there's adequate resources for funding this particular collaborations. If we go to the next one, the fourth one, we had another discussion that dealt with what some people classified as experiments. And what they were talking about, the need for NSF to have an experiment with the review process. I'm trying to select reviewers who had a deeper understanding of both disciplinary fields. And we should add that SBE is fairly broad in the sense that it has economics, it has political science, it has sociology, it has geography. So the issue was that reviewers need to be sensitive to the kind of proposals that are being submitted. I think the last thing was a mechanism for teaming. And I think some of the questions have already spoken to this. and especially trying to find a match. But we had one presentation that dealt with not just kind of human teaming, but also issues of having robots and humans interacting as team members. I think the last one was developing a kind of a center model. And before I end, I'd just like Beth to also speak to that. She has something similar that she runs Georgia Tech, but she has a prior experience. If you could just comment just quickly on that, Beth.
Sure, Willie. One of the things that we saw in these unicorns that have been successful doing this type of multidisciplinary research is that there is infrastructure in place to allow for sustained collaborations and collaborations to work across multiple project teams. And for many folks, they pointed to different types of center models to enable that, so that you can have trained data scientists who are not working just on one particular project, but for example, are supporting a raft of projects, or you can have sustainable funding so that you can have long-term relationships with community partners. Again, not something that just works within, a 3 to 5 year period of a particular grant. So we wanted NSF to consider what other kinds of center mechanisms would allow for supporting this type of socio-technical research.
And I guess the final thing is that what Natalie has done in terms of reaching out to the ASA, I'm a sociologist, is incredible. And I'm very proud that she did that as a former congressional fellow. This is what congressional fellows are supposed to do. We're supposed to cross those lines and bring communities together. And Natalie, I don't know, you realize how much this means, particularly for those of us who are members of the ASA, but also for NSF itself. This is remarkable what you've been able to do. Thank you.
So now I know we're a bit past time, but Natalie, please let us know if you want us to take questions now, but we should also get into our breakouts.
We'll get there, but you guys have covered so much. It'd be great to make sure that we cover some questions. And thank you very much, Willie, for saying very nice things. Looks like there's a comment that's about interdisciplinary reviews making it more likely to increase your chance of negative reviews.
One of the things that we discussed, it'd be great to get feedback from the breakout groups, but is to some extent lowering the bar. Doreen mentioned eager grants, but ways that we could do quick teaming, and whether you call it planning grants or just getting the teams going, and maybe not making that review process as arduous as some other types of grants would be, just to seed the types of teams who then could go forward with more competitive grants to get through. As someone noted, like when you have multiple disciplines in the room, it seems like you have multiple ways to get rejected. So we want to flip that. And again, I'm not an NSFer, I'm just another faculty member. So I can say these things and NSF can figure out what makes sense, but that's part of what we wanted to suggest, was understanding barriers to teaming and barriers to getting these kinds of collaborations going.
I'm not seeing any hands raised or questions in the chat. If you have any, feel free to unmute yourself and ask.
I have a quick question. Sorry. So I'm just curious, like, at what point do you think NSF in academia, you talk about moving the needle, Willie, and also Beth, you made some really good discussions about what needs, what's taking place. But like one of the things that I find problematic is that we are kind of in these silos where, like you were talking about the methods, where sociologists do quantitative and qualitative, let's find a place for them. But I mean, there's also other places in which sociologists also fit in terms of like meta-analysis of, looking at the bigger picture. I think sociologists are extremely good at this, especially in looking at, how to best serve society. I mean, and then there's also the connections in terms of applied sociology and how they interact with communities. I think that those are also sometimes under utilized. And so in what ways do you see change needing to happen at NSF and academia to make these true collaborations to be more successful and also welcomed? Thank you.
Oh, Willie's staying on mute, so I'm not sure if he's going to try to.
Yeah, I think one of the things that came out very strongly, I'm glad you raised that question, because there was a lot of discussion about, even among SBE scholars, these various methods. And I think one that became a fairly detailed conversation about people who work with community-based organizations, and that the methodology might be very different. But I think the sentiment was that NSF, if you're going to try to have these collaborations, there's some trepidations because some of these things have been there before, and SBE community has not felt that it was really a continuation. So I think one of the issues that people wanted to address, is this for real? And if so, are we going to take in consideration that people have different ways of going about addressing a problem? But will the review process recognize and reward that kind of diversity? I think the other thing that came up, and that speaking to this particular point, is that, and I think we've heard it before, and Beth just mentioned this, is having some trust in the review process, quite frankly. I think that was kind of the bottom line, because I think people who, I'm quantitatively trained, so it's a little bit different, but I think the issue is this trust that the system is actually going to be fair, legitimate, and something will happen, as Beth talking about moving the needle, because it's just not quite the case. And I'll give you an example. When I was on SBE previously, most of the grants that were awarded by SBE in those days were fairly small grants, you know, like 100 or 200 was kind of max. And then there was an issue for a major grant that dealt with issues that intersect with, I think at the time, was the scientific community in the sense of looking at nanotechnology. And that it kind of led to the fact that in SBE that there was going to be this large pot of money. And then it turns out there was only a large pot of money for 2 grants. And so the next year, there was less money. So there's a historical thing I think some people have to get past. But I think your question is very, very helpful. And hopefully in the breakout groups, we could discuss this more. I just think at this point in time, having served on some of the other advisory committees at NSF, we have a moment in history where we do have a possibility to cross these particular lines that was not there previously. I could be wrong, but this is what I see as our moment, and we need to take advantage of it.
And just a quick add to that, I know some of the advisory committee discussions we've been in from a methods point of view is also look to training of students and providing resources for that. So again, how do we build up this community and build up infrastructure for that, such that when you get to the reviewers, then you know, we're able to surmount those barriers. But you know, I'd love to go to a training institute where, you know, half the training is by social scientists and half the training is by computer scientists. We could have a lot to learn from each other, and we could actually start to build that groundwork. So there's multiple ways to make progress here, and one of the things that was interesting about reporting to SBE and CISE together is I think there is an appetite for a multi-pronged strategy.
Okay, and I think with that, we should transition into the breakout rooms now. Thank you, Beth and Willie, very much for the overview. They will both be leading breakouts, so you will see them again. Well, I think we should kick off the report outs, and we're not too terribly off on time now, so that's great. So Darlene, would you like to go first?
So mine was about topics of mutual interest, and so we used the whiteboard to splatter on a whole bunch of topics, and of course there were many, many. Then we also talked about the fact that this was just the beginning of a conversation. And we're going to continue the conversation with email and also to see what we can do to continue.
And then moving next to Joe for session B.
Okay, well, we were talking about exploring new ways to collect, store, and share data. We spent most of our time talking about new ways of collecting data. Some of the things we talked about were things like sensors, sensors taking the place of people, things like this, some of the new opportunities that were available, but also the privacy issues that this raises, and that this is both kind of exciting, but also terrifying. And other possibilities, there's a lot of electronic communications, for example, in organizations. How can you get this data? Because there's certainly a lot of data there, but how could you get consent? And of course, nowadays, so much social interaction takes place via platforms. Again, an incredible amount of data. So how can you get access to it? How do you deal with privacy issues? So these were some of the things we talked about there. We also touched on citizen science as another thing that is increasingly possible, but how do we incentivize citizen involvement and get them to produce scientifically worthwhile things? And we talked about surveys, an old-fashioned kind of method, and are they obsolete? And the sort of consensus, so to speak, was that they're not obsolete, but they may need to be supplemented because of problems such as declining response rates. So there's need to correct them, perhaps crosswalk with other kinds of data sources and so forth. We talked just a little bit about storage. And one issue that came up there is there's so much information, so much data, some media data, et cetera. We should be attentive to what's being archived and not being archived from the web. Even knowing what's being archived would be quite useful. And finally, we talked about sharing, and things that came up there were problems that social scientists may have, even accessing information that's collected from, say, informatics departments, universities. So again, just siloed researchers not having access to each other's information. Another issue that came up was that some other sciences, physical sciences such as physics, may have done well at standardizing formats, whereas in the social sciences, this may be less well done, such as in health data, for example, the lack of standards, lack of metadata, and so forth, and possibilities for, say, large-scale projects that may help to get groups together and work on standardizing data. So those were some of the things we talked about.
Great, thank you. And next, Willie, on training scientists to work across disciplines.
We had a small group, but it was a dynamic group. What we talked about is some of the same issues that came up in the larger workshop that we did back in May. And one in particular was these particular partnerships or training or teams of people, so they can actually get together, have a network interaction with each other before writing the major proposal. So one idea was that for one of the speakers is that can be critical because that gives the team time enough to have a common language, to have kind of network and bonding set, and then you can apply for the major proposal because you have a common set of language and so forth and so on. But there needs to be more of that. There was a related discussion on terms of supply demand. So if we're going to be training people for these particular positions, we got industry has one expectation, maybe academia has another. government might have something different. Because one thing you don't want to do is start training people for these particular hybrids, and then the opportunity structure is not there. Another one came up that there is some informal organization around networking, and that may be another possibility. But part of the issue, as one person pointed out, who's actually in the government, finding out about these particular opportunities. And if you're kind of like some of us, we didn't know what we wanted to be. So we tried different things, but that's not a real good plan because you have to have some knowledge of what's out there. Another one was we had a member who actually works at a university where they do training and cross-disciplinary training, interdisciplinary kind of training. And it seemed to be that in that case, some of the issue there, the training included trying to have a decent understanding of a common language. But some of that funding came from NIH. So it may well be that if there are things that NIH are already, maybe NSF can learn from that. Another issue that came up was from one of the undergrads, and that dealt with someone who is interested in interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary work, but also international work. And how does that person find a process for doing that? So the Fulbright is seen as one possibility, but from NSF perspective or related kind of perspectives, how do we get this to undergrads at a certain point where they already have exposure to getting this particular training? I think the other one that came up is some people are driven by their own personal values. I think the person who mentioned about the Fulbright said that person wanted to do social good. And so driven by doing something with the technology and with the dictionary training for a better society, for a more efficient society. The other issue came up with when we have these particular teams, the composition of those teams. Do they represent inclusiveness in terms of gender, race, disability, and so forth and so on? Or is just a small group of elite individuals who populate and dominate as it is? I think we kind of ended up that we don't know, but we think this is something that NSF should try to support these particular funding opportunities for training, because the cost of higher education is prohibited as it is. That was the general thoughts that we had.
Great, thank you so much. And the last one, I believe, is Beth.
Yes, thanks. So our group focused on partnerships, and we actually ended up spending our time on the multidisciplinary partnerships challenges. And I think we would have to have a whole nother breakout group to also then get into industry partnerships and third-party partnerships. But really a frank and interesting discussion on, again, kind of the challenges of getting these cross-disciplinary groups functioning together, and the surprises by many of all of the different failure modes there. So one of the comments was, anticipating that you would spend your time on those intellectual cross-disciplinary challenges, but it was really the personnel aspects that were different, because people work in different time frames, and graduate students have different expectations, and some may also be having to TA, and some of them aren't. And there's compensation strategies that are different. And I know I came from a meeting where we just spent the usual session of what does it mean for us to co-author papers together, and paper author ordering, and all these kinds of things. And so one of the suggestions to NSF was, what kind of programmatic support could you help us to bringing these teams together? So I think that harkens back to some of the things that Willie just said as well. And it's almost like you need a training camp for collaboration. And we did mention that we've come a long way, and collaboration plans are a common requirement for many of these grants. But I think sometimes those things become coordination plans, like how are we going to meet and how often are we going to meet? And it's only N weeks or N months into it that you realize when you're talking about theory, you're actually talking about something completely different. Or questions of data or community or all of these things. And so once you've been around the neighborhood a few times, you get used to this. But we don't want to make it that hard for every junior and new faculty member to come in and go from their disciplinary expertise and the PhD work they've done to be able to go into these types of multidisciplinary teams. There was a question, again, this was something that Willie and I mentioned, that there has been a desire for the CISE community and the SBE communities to collaborate, and was an example of an older program in human social dynamics, and that there were a lot of huge barriers and failures within that, and reports written about how to overcome that. And we need to make sure that we tap into our institutional memory and continue to learn from that experience. And again, referring to creating a network for collaborators, maybe it's also a network of learning from failure and learning from the mistakes of others, so that your team can manage and mitigate those barriers as you go forward. It does seem a little frustrating when you admit that, yes, we had to spend months figuring out what community meant, or we had to spend forever trying to figure out how to manage the culture of the students, because they have such different compensation and expectations and resources available to them. But these are key impediments to the types of collaborations that we want to build. So if we could have planning grants or training institutes or ways of helping prepare these teams, I think we'd see more successes and maybe less scars on our backs.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. With that, I'm going to remind everybody, choose your networking session. And to close all of this out, it is such a privilege to bring all of you together. It is bring and see worlds colliding, if you will. I really am so grateful to all of the attendees and all of the speakers for making today such a great pre-conference. The theme of today's discussion has become even more timely since I submitted this proposal back in January, on multiple layers, one of which is that we're living our whole social lives through our screens. And, I chose to do this fellowship at NSF and in my non-native discipline because I've yet to come across a real social challenge that any one discipline can solve. And throughout this fellowship, I've been fortunate enough to be included in so many different conversations and about different topics that have shaped how I think about science, including, through the AI Institutes and Civic Innovation Challenge programs. And what I hope that we've accomplished today is to share a peek behind the curtain about some of the different efforts happening in this space and how you can get involved. I think certainly for me a year ago and still sometimes today, NSF it can be a hard organization to understand and navigate when you don't know how it works. And so I hope that going forward, all of you will be inspired to get to know NSF, both in these networking sessions that we're about to go into, and also moving forward. We know that we're supposed to call our elected officials, but we don't always think about calling the public servants who represent us and our disciplines and the universities where we work. And I think there's a lot of really great opportunities to look for, to serve as a reviewer and learn more about the process, to come to NSF as a program officer. The second networking session, again, we'll have numerous program officers who are on leave from their universities who you can talk to. And for the social scientists in particular, I would encourage you to not let the jargon of words like cyber infrastructure scare you away. There's really a lot of really exciting opportunities for bringing together the computer and social sciences. And I hope that those among you are feeling inspired to do so.